Hey everyone, welcome. Good afternoon, good evening. So nice to have you here. So, blame. I want to talk about blame today. I had a long discussion about blame. And it's such an important one because in truth, we are a society of blame. Our society is structured on this idea around punishment. If something is happening, somebody's to blame. It's in our consciousness of how we work. And it's actually not very effective. It's not very helpful. It doesn't actually solve problems. It doesn't help us at all to solve problems. And it doesn't mean that people can't be held accountable for the things that they have done. But blaming them is extremely not helpful. It typically leads to shame. It starts with blame and then that turns into shame. And that just really doesn't resolve anything. And so, one of the ways I think of it is like if there's a crying baby, hi Rowena, if there's a crying baby, like if you're a new parent and you're trying to get some sleep and your baby cries and night after night after night and you get worn out, you get really worn down by this, what do? You blame the baby, right? Like, oh, the baby's fault. It's the baby's fault. It's the baby's fault. Oh my gosh, the baby's doing this to me. And that's do you see how that's not productive? Because in truth, it's not the baby's fault. It's the crying that's causing you to not sleep. But we shift that into it's the baby's fault. And there's a huge distinction here between the two versus the crying that the baby's doing is causing me to not be able to sleep and therefore I'm getting cranky. And because we tend to short circuit things, we tend to take the shortcut. And what happens is when we do this repetitively, especially if we do this with children, the tendency is that child tends to think that they're a bad child. The tendency is for the person to feel bad. That shame seeps in, but also a sense of badness seeps in for that person who has a regular dose of blame, because connected to blame is wrongness. They're connected together. That's how our society works. And it becomes a real problem when we parent this way. It's your fault. You did this. And hi, Cooperage. And again, I want to say that it doesn't mean that people can't be accountable for their actions. When we're accountable, we do not have to have a sense of wrongness attached to it. When we are blamed for something going wrong, there is a sense of wrongness that is attached to it, and they're completely different experiences. Being held accountable separates out any negative aspects towards that person. And this is so important for people because we have this culture of blame that we all live in. And I know that, when I was growing up, it was really important to point fingers at whose fault it was. And typically what happens too, one reason why this is a problem is because the pointed finger ends up typically going to the weakest person in that group, the weakest person in the family. And I'm not saying weak according to any negative structure, but I'm talking about maybe the youngest, the females, right? The people who have less power in the family. So, because if the finger gets pointed at the person with the most power, that person will point the finger to somebody else. And the finger gets pointed down and down and down to the person who has less of a voice in the family. And depending on what culture you're in, where you live, that could mean different things, but maybe it means the person who has special needs. And that is so unhealthy. It is so not helpful for the family. And actually in a good, strong family structure, the person with the most power holds up the people with less power. And they take accountability for some of the things that happen. That's a whole other discussion. But this idea around blame is so important. And it's really important actually to have a different paradigm because things go awry in families, don't they? Things happen. Hi, Allie. Hard things happen in families. And we harm each other in families too, don't we? We harm each other in families, parents, and I'm not talking about necessarily physical harm, even though that can happen too. We might grab a child who's trying to take something, or grab a child who's trying to hurt another child. Feelings get hurt. And that's also another way we harm. We can harm a person's sense of self. We can harm their self-esteem. This happens in human relationships, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It just happens. And so it's important for us to recognize when we have harmed somebody, and to be accountable for that harm. I'm kind of going in a different direction here, and maybe I shouldn't do that. I think this is a whole other talk. I think I'm going to just stay with blame here. It's connected to blame. And but really just what I want to say is that you can have a paradigm of punishment. Someone does something wrong and someone gets punished. Or you can have a paradigm of that someone does something that's hurtful. Someone has harmed somebody else. And we can hold them accountable without attaching to them that they're a bad person. Most of the time, we don't know the difference. Most of the time, we don't even know we're doing it, to tell you the truth. And so much of it shows up in our tone of voice, in our facial expression, in our cadence, in how we're talking, how we're looking at someone, how we're glaring at someone when we're angry. And it takes a lot of practice, actually, to work on. It happens in a passive-aggressive way as well. And it really is so powerful when we can start to take blame out of our language. I used to actually tell my children, I don't care whose fault this is. I don't care. I'm not interested in blaming somebody. I want us to talk about, because oftentimes what happens with kids, right? One child does something to one child. The child does something back. The child does something back. The child does something back. It's like this back and forth, and things get worse and louder and harder and more hurtful. And so what I often would say to my kids is that I'm not interested in who's at fault or who to blame. We're not going to blame anybody here. Let's talk about what you contributed to this situation. That's more about accountability. So let's talk about, each one of us talk about, including me, even if I wasn't even involved, what did we contribute? What did we do or not do that might have affected the situation? And what can we do better next time? Thank you for the love. That is a much more powerful conversation. This is really around restorative practices. That is a much more powerful conversation than it's your fault. You started it. Is that the person who's at fault, or is it the person who did the most damage? Are they the person who gets the blame? Like, right? It's sometimes it's like you can't tell who's right or wrong or who did the worst thing. You'll never get to a good solution if you focus on who to blame and who to punish. You will get to much better resolution and finding solutions within your family if you can focus on, who's been harmed, because oftentimes multiple people were harmed, even when it's kids going back and forth. And what did each person contribute to that harm, and what could they do better next time, right? There's a learning process that happened with that, and people reflect on their actions and how their actions have affected other people. It's a very powerful practice. And even if I wasn't involved in say it was an altercation between my two children or something, even if I wasn't involved, I was in the other room, I still ask myself, and I involve myself in the conversation as well. Because, maybe I didn't get there soon enough. Maybe I was too tired to get involved. Maybe I waited until things got too out of hand. And I'm responsible for safety in my home. So I also take some responsibility, and I become accountable as the leader in my family. I become accountable for what's happening. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to do as a parent. It's about putting on the table this buffet of observations, this buffet of discussion, this buffet of topics, and about accountability and support, and being able to talk about how we've been harmed and what that felt like, and what you would like to ask for. Like you get to ask for help from somebody, or you get to ask for reparation from somebody. Having these conversations is absolutely one of the most powerful things we can do. And it is possible. If your family isn't used to it, it may get messy at first because they'll want to stay on the blame train. That's what they just want to do, because it feels powerful to blame someone else, even though it's a false sense of power. It's really not doing anything. When we can come up with solutions and stay in relationship, that is way more powerful. And we want to stay in relationship. Tell me if this is making sense to you. Like, I really would love to know your thoughts on this. So if we can stay in relationship in conflict, holy cow, it's beautiful and it's powerful. And it can do so much for our children's emotional intelligence, their social emotional development. It's incredibly powerful. So, and a lot of this comes from restorative practices, restorative justice. It's an amazing field. It's something I've spent quite a bit of time studying. And I just wanted to share that with you because it was something that came up that comes up with parents quite often, actually, and how to resolve some of that sibling rivalry, conflict, and how do you deal with it as a parent and be the leader and support a healthy process, support healthy interactions in our family. So I wanted to share that with you today. Tell me what your biggest takeaway was. I hope that was helpful. And I hope you have a beautiful, amazing day. Thank you. Bye.